Welcome back to the Mentor Roulette grind, and this time we finally hit a Joker, and as a result I am choosing to try some new things. For this set I will switch job after every 3 relevant duties. Guild tests don't count, and on this special occasion we're also visiting Light for all of the Mentor Roulettes. Also, this took place on the Monday evening, the day before 7.3. We get a decent variety of duties, about as expected, and we start off as Viper. I'm sure you expected something else. And for duty 1, we are an instant replacement in Underkeep. And Nanette, the samurai, either knew me or asked about me because of the traveler tag. Aside from a repair emergency on our healer at the start of the duty, not much out of the ordinary happened. A general piece of advice as a Viper in a dungeon group with another melee DPS is that in situations where spread markers or other mechanics make the positioning a bit tight, if you hold on to your coils for those moments, you can give your co-DPS more room so neither of you have to risk losing up time running away. I both made use of this on the first boss during the Phase 2 Chilling Chirp, where the spread markers can make the space quite tight, and again on the final boss during Neutralized Front Lines. For duty 2, we went to Over the Belt Buckle, and in this level range, Viper is both ridiculously strong and ridiculously silly. Once the damage buff is up and running, every GCD will be equivalent to 308 potency, putting most other jobs to shame. For duty 3, we went to Next to the Anvil, and on top of what I just mentioned, the damage bonus also applies to auto attacks, so even the potential caster or some such that might be able to compete would find that the Viper auto attacks makes the power difference completely insurmountable. And assuming you start with Raving Fangs, the looping rotation boils down to 2-1-1-1, 2-1-1-1, and so on. Although you can also just press the glowy button. Once the buffs are going, all 3 attacks have the exact same potency. For duty 4, we went to Garuda Extreme, and before we even had a chance to get started, both tanks and a healer left. Taldamar came to our rescue to help with the tanking, but we had to wait until we had at least 2 tanks for the ad phase. Once we did, we were off to the races with just 1 brave Sprout healer. Unfortunately, the first attempt goes somewhat sideways. Several players get hit by the Mistral song, with our Black Mage just flat out dying from it. Then, when we get to the ad phase of Tirada and Sapana, they get split up incorrectly, causing extra confusion, which culminates in a sudden circle AoE killing off most of the raid. For the second pull, we've reviewed and made sure we actually know which tank takes which ad and where they need to go. The reason why it matters that Tirada is sent away to Narnia is because Garuda always swaps position with Sapana, which both means that if you try to kill Sapana first, you will probably be awkwardly paused on the way, but it also means that if Tirada is not the ad that is in Narnia, then the switcheroo itself, while fixable, will cause a lot of unnecessary added confusion and danger. Optimally, you have the tank separate far away, bring Tirada to the south and have everyone attack her in particular, and once that is done, deal with Sapana. Right as we finish the ad phase, we also have an additional healer join in to help us clean up what remains, and I really mean that. Assuming your party is just somewhat bringing it on the damage, you can just sweep the whole plume mechanic, ignoring protecting one of them, and just focus Garuda, and the fight should end before the next big raid wight that you would need that wind barrier for would come. And under normal circumstances, you can just tank limit break that one if needed. We of course clear up very nicely. For duty 5, we went to P7N Agdistis. One of those neat fights with 0 positionals to worry about, and the hitbox is so big that it is incredibly unlikely you will ever be out of melee range. As the duty is level 90, the Viper reawakens only take like 8 seconds to do without Ouroboros, which can be convenient for reacting to raid buffs. As 2 reawakens can easily fit inside a 20-second window, assuming Serpent's Iron naturally aligns with buffs, you can simply send it when you see a raid buff appear. Another thing to take note of is that Uncoiled Fury is a lot weaker at level 90, without the OGCD follow-ups, but it is still worth using all the coils you get. However, as the boss will knock you into the air a few times throughout the fight, that is actually the best time to use Uncoiled Fury, as if it aligns just right, then the majority, if not the entirety, of the knock-up time is spent waiting for the GCD anyway. Aside from that, our party only has a few deaths, mainly to silly fall damage related mistakes, and we still clear at a very good speed, so I would call it a solid run. For duty 6, we switch to Black Mage, of course, and go to Ifrit hard. The only real optimizations you can do here as Black Mage is UI1 B3 Swiftcast, or aim to spread thunder to the nails that seem to live longer. One thing worth noting about using Swiftcast aggressively is that you may be put in a situation where using Swiftcast while running away is going to be more valuable. One last tip to consider if Ifrit ends up in a position where you can't just outrange his knockbacks is that Mana Ward can at least protect you for a while. Aside from us forgetting to use Limit Break 3, I'd say this run was pretty solid. For duty 7, we went to Yuweyawata Field Station, and of course, I have a few tips for each boss, or alternatively just strategies I use. This is also a decent opportunity for me to go over how I deal with max level AoE pulls as a Black Mage, so let's start with that. My favorite way to start a dungeon as Black Mage is to Swiftcast either B3 or B2 depending on the targets, then apply Thunder, triple cast, B4 or Freeze, and then transpose followed by possibly another Thunder depending on if it is needed, and then either F2 or F3 depending on targets. Then Fire Paradox to set up the Fire Starter for later. And then I get on to Flare 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 Star, putting down ley lines when we stop running. For all pulls after the first one, I tend to go with Thunder into Ice Paradox, transpose via 3 Fire Paradox, possibly more Thunder, and then Flare 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 Star. Both of these kinds of run and gun style quote-unquote openers are things I don't really talk about in my job guide, and I wonder if others do in theirs. But now you at least have a way to do it if you weren't sure before. Aside from very specific exceptions, I do pretty much all AoE pulls exactly like this. Now, for the first boss, as it turns out, if you ignore the crystals, they apply Magic Vuln, with multiple of them popping during overwhelming amounts of damage, so you at least don't want to ignore all of them. However, I usually try my best to efficiently fight off them all, but I will often switch targets quite sporadically during this phase to try and make sure the really good attacks go on the boss and that any spell that would severely overkill a crystal goes on a different one. For the second boss, making sure to completely empty the vaults before the intermission starts is a solid move. Both make sure you won't overcap polyglots during it, but also try to make sure you don't find yourself needing to choose between saving Astral Soul progress and resetting to full MP for the second phase. For the final boss, the main tips I'd give for Black Mage is to, if you have one, put the first ley lines under the boss in case of the half-room cleaves. Another timing for ley lines is just as the boss is about to get ready to remove the center of the arena. Failing that, the last timing to put them down is around when the spread markers overlapping with the half-room cleaves occur. But you will probably have to retrace the lines inside the stack marker that follows, so it starts to get complicated. Also, is it just me, or does the boss always dash to the furthest away corner from the party between the options that don't involve jumping straight across the center? Like, it feels like every time I try to run ahead to somewhere, the bunny conveniently picks the other path. Do let me know. For duty 8, we went to Hostile Raves, and this might actually deserve the trophy for absolute worst as Black Mage. No Umbral Soul, so no value in downtime before the Gobu. Nothing lives long enough for Thunder. Not even the Gobu really does. It also isn't helping that if anyone else is attacking your target directly, it probably dies before your spell lands. Fun. For duty 9, we went to Friendly Neighborhoods, and at least in this one, Blizzard 2 gives options. Not great options, mind you, but at least you can choose to do something else. The main concern, of course, being the long cast time of Blizzard 2. One little optimization you can do is to prepare Swiftcast as you run up to the Spriggan pack, to skip some of the extra cast time on one Blizzard 2. For duty 10, we went back for another round at the neutral street corners. Not that it changed much. I guess some good news is that the toad at the end can live just long enough that none of a fire state goes to waste. For duty 11, we went to Total Power, and this team was reasonably well optimized. I got the impression, based on the healer suddenly stopping their attack, that they weren't clear on the fact that the fire sprite needed for the herb patch spawns exactly when the turtle passes 50% HP, but aside from that, this went fast. For duty 12, we went to Ifrit hard, again, although this time some strange things happen. Right at the outset, the Gunbreaker seems to really want to face the boss towards the raid, and when knocked back, just drags it closer to us, and keeps doing it right up until the very moment where several of us get hit unnecessarily and I ask them to stop it. On a different note, a tip for tanking this fight is that Ifrit will regularly perform circular knockbacks, you have probably noticed. If he is perfectly centered, then it is almost impossible to avoid being knocked back. On the other hand, if you pull him to the edge of the arena, it is suddenly very easy for ranged players to avoid being pushed. At the same time though, if you're backed up against the wall, you don't get shoved anywhere when he does knock you back. So just let him shove you to the wall and wait for him there if you like. For duty 13, we switched to Gunbreaker for Amdapor Keep. You know the one, with the really long hallways. We started the duty with the Gigapole, and a quick tip for that is that there are 3 cultists spread out across the packs that specifically will start summoning something when pulled instead of just chasing you. Stunning or interrupting them will cause them to entirely give up on this project and just chase you, so try to stop each of them. There's one at the very start, one in the pack at the start of the courtyard, and one at the purple wall at the end. Based on this Gigapole, I got the impression my team would better stomach splitting up the rest of the big poles of the dungeon in 2. I initially decided to do it to hold back while Super Polite was on cooldown to not risk as much, but the duty felt a lot smoother when we did it like that, so I continued that way. A quick tip for the 2 ladder bosses. For the wall boss, remember that if the boss does cast Repel, that the Repel is a circular knockback from the center of the boss, so make sure to stand straight in front of it. For the last boss, while Imminent Catastrophe sounds very ominous, it deals very survivable damage, so simply ignore it and kill the boss. For duty 14, we went to Garuda hard, and as I see the warrior put on their stance first, I let them do the tanking. The very first set of plumes was also quite funny, as they all immediately died before they even got a chance to move. After that, the fight goes quite smoothly, right up until the last part where tornado AoEs start happening. The warriors seem to really want to fight the boss in the center, and only thought about moving when the tornado appeared in the middle. But hilariously, instead of realizing it is going to happen again, after the tornado resolves, they just come back to the middle, which leads to them being hit again. Right as I saw them run back in again for seconds, I decide to take over. Come on now, it's pretty obvious the boss is going to keep doing that. Not reacting to it will just lead to your death. So I grab Garuda and move her far south, which is commonly where groups fight her usually, as she will jump to there for the final ad phase naturally, if I remember correctly. We managed to clear things up just fine. For duty 15, we went to Strayborough Deadwalk. I think the main mistake I made was that I'm still not super used to having skill speed on Gunbreaker, so I often felt compelled to drift No Mercy and extra GZD to be sure I could late weave it properly. I don't think I really lost out on a lot of uses as a result though, so it was probably fine. There were also a few times where I landed hypervelocity outside No Mercy due to poor planning, and placing Sonic Break too early. On his Hoyle Redness, no, I'm not correcting that, the only player in the party that ends up being hatted is our summoner, who gets hatted twice. But somehow, not even once, gets a single Vuln stack as a result of the slowing down and binding and disorientation that all this causes. That itself is very impressive. On the final boss, our healer ends up getting sniped by not noticing that it was flesh boss stuck coming at us. But since we had a summoner, this was easily solved with a hard-casted raise, so overall, a relatively fast and smooth run. For duty 16, we switched to Sage for dead ends. Throughout the entire dungeon, I felt like I had to work a lot harder than normal healing the tank on all the AoE pulls. It turns out that for the majority, if not all of the pulls, the tank was exclusively using Heart of Corundum, maybe Aurora, but not really much else. I saw one camouflage. We still managed, of course, but it would have been nice with just a rampart on some of them. To be fair though, it is a returning player, so they might be relearning the ropes. For the first boss, I have one tip I always give. Wind in your back. Simply put, if you have the wind in your back for Miasmata, you just have to slot in where the safe spot is. While if you have the wind in your face, you have to both dash straight through the solid wall of Miasma and also find the safe spot. It is just way harder that way. That said, as the healer, try to keep an eye on your party during and right after this mechanic, as you may need to use multiple Ishunas to save the team, and if you're slow to get to it, you might not have the time to GCD Ishuna everyone. On the final boss, right at the very end, everyone except myself gets hit by the doom from being hit by the butterfly mechanic. This doom requires being healed fully to go away, so I end up using pretty much every cooldown I have left, so it was quite convenient that the fight was just about to end anyway. Despite the many mistakes, 0 deaths. For duty 17, we went to Holminster Switch, and while the duty went decently well, some pulls felt weirdly slow. It turned out that throughout the duty, the Bard, first off, had the song order Army's Paean, Mage's Ballad, Wanderer's Minuet. Second, they only used battle voice when the first and second bosses were close to death, like as a finisher at around 20% or so. But aside from that, never. I've mentioned this one before, that I can see why someone would do it. Use the burst cooldowns to raise the boss to the finish or some such, in case like they have like an enrage phase or something. But obviously there's no need for it, and sending it sooner means you'll get to use it more. Admittedly, aligning your songs just right for the burst in a dungeon is really awkward, especially from the start. Personally, I just use Wanderers and burst on the first pull and hope for the best. Now, all that said, on the pull just before the second boss, I ended up so low on options that I had to rely a bit on spell healing to get through. What exactly went wrong there is hard to say, but Sage is in a somewhat funny state at this level. The Paladin was using their cooldowns too though. On the second boss, our team also had a strangely strict positioning for the limit cut, consistently shuffling into position to make sure the boss did the slashes clockwise around. I'm not sure how that worked out so consistently, but it did. And finally for duty 18, we went to Sohm hard. The second boss, the Garuda Alligator, was quite interesting. It has the classic frontal swipe, backside tail swipe, the dash and a fireball it can shoot. But when it roars and starts glowing, each of these tells change, or rather the payoff of them change. To be fair, they don't change that much, so the general idea of responding to it is the same. But it looks like the tail swipe changes to be much wider but hit everywhere except behind the boss, or maybe it just looks weird. The fireball is replaced with a persistent flamethrower cone, and the frontal swipe leaves behind a circle AoE explosion that detonates a few seconds later. Quite an interesting fight that makes great use of the fact that players generally should know the tells of this type of enemy, and then flips it on its head when it enrages. And it enrages frequently, by the way, like on and off. This Joker set of duties got me thinking that it might be a lot more fun to just make up a set of rules for each Mentor Roulette set to keep it exciting, fun and fresh, instead of just sticking strictly to the wheel. I would love to hear what you think about that idea. That said, we had a solid set of duties, and we have also passed 8 17ths on the achievement. Now, that is all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you would like to support me and my channel more directly, you can become a member like these wonderful people here. You can also alternatively support me through Ko-Fi, link in the description. You can also support the channel by letting the YouTube algorithm know by liking the video, leaving a comment, subscribing, sharing, and hitting the bell to get notified when next I post a video. Fun fact, while Blizzard 2 is considered a very bad spell by black mages now, it somehow used to be worse. Before Endwalker, Blizzard 2 was a circle AoE centered on the black mage, and its damage was abysmal. Before Shadowbringers, it at least applied a bind effect, giving it some reason to work that way, although if memory serves, Freeze was a better option at applying bind at that time and also did more damage, although it was ground targeted. Let's just say that AoE ice magic has had it rough.